I have a boundary around hearing the ways my actions hurt you. Well, I have a boundary about you repeating back to me what I just did to you. I have a boundary that if you tell me I'm gaslighting you, I will tell you that you're gaslighting me. Whoa. Respect my boundary around showing any kind of emotion in your voice when I do something objectively cruel to you. I have a boundary where I don't respond to your texts if you're trying to hold me accountable. Boundary about calling me hypocritical when I'm being incredibly hypocritical. These are my boundaries. It is so abusive of you to not respect my boundaries. You are literally gaslighting me. I gave you a boundary. I have a boundary that you're not allowed to tell me a boundary back when I tell you that I have a boundary. You don't get to have any feelings about that. That's my boundary. A boundary that your only job is to look hot, S my D, and laugh at my jokes. That you are my therapist. I have a boundary that if you ask me for anything and I say any of it is due to my mental health, you're the asshole. You are walking all over my boundaries. Boundary, 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 boundary. I have a boundary that if I just did something super fucked up to you and you respond to me with more than one text, you're such a dick and you don't respect my boundaries about texting me multiple times. I have a boundary where I can do literally whatever I want and you have to mold your entire existence and emotional life to what I can handle. I have a boundary that my boundaries trump all of your boundaries. I have a boundary that needs and boundaries are not the same thing and we can never have a conversation as long as I use the word boundary.
My wife is deaf, and we just started testing our relationship by playing Mario Party. So we wanted to show you some of the signs that we use for all of the different Nintendo characters, starting with Nintendo.
Nintendo?
It's the letter N and game, Nintendo. But let's go to the main character, Mario. So it's the letter M on like, where is M? Yeah. Luigi, same concept. L, not, but yeah. And then the Princess Peach. And the other one, Daisy. One of my favorite two characters, Wario, like his nose, and then Waluigi, it's his mustache. And then we found one name that we couldn't find a name for this character. We really needed one for Yoshi, and together we took the letter Y and Yoshi. Ah! Oh, and one more, Bowser.
Have you heard about this? This is called Palestine Cola. We're gonna try some, and it's supposed to be an alternative to buying Coca-Cola because I don't know if you knew this, but they actually have factories on occupied Palestinian territory. And so Coca-Cola has been profiting off of the occupation of the Palestinians, and we don't want to support any of that. 3 Palestinian brothers decided to start a brand called Palestine Drinks, and this is one of the drinks they're offering. They're working with the Safad Foundation to donate 100% of the profits to projects in Gaza. So I'm about to try this, and I'll give you my honest review. All right, here we go. Hold on. Obviously, this tastes like cola. I like it. It's good. I thought I was tripping when I took a sip of this because it didn't have that like dark syrupy taste you'll get when you drink Coke. But I looked at the ingredients and it actually has way less sugar. And Palestine Drinks actually does have a sugar-free version. If you want to get some of these for yourself or for your family, they're actually launching Palestine Cola in America for pre-order on November 1st. And there's a link in my bio where you can go participate in that. Thank you, and free Palestine.
Oh, did I get too political? My bad. I don't want 22,000 SA victims to be denied abortion every year.
Oh, sorry. Was I too political? My bad. I just want to be able to marry my girlfriend one day.
My bad. Did I get too political? I just want to make sure kids can go to school without fearing for their lives.
Oh, was I too political? I'm sorry. I just don't want to have to be a girl again.
Oh, was I too political? I don't want a rapist to have access to nuclear weapons the same way I wouldn't want them to have access to a gun.
Oh, estaba siendo demasiado político, es solamente que no quiero que deporten a todos mis seres queridos que aportan tanto a este país.
Did I get too political? My bad. I just want to make sure my trans siblings have bodily autonomy.
Oh, sorry. Did I get too political? I just don't think men should be in charge of women's reproductive health.
If you got they, them in your bio, I am not going to argue with you. I am clearly outnumbered.
Uber and Lyft need to respect our right to ride. We're here to bring attention to the access refusals that we see as guide dog handlers and as service animal handlers from Uber and Lyft.
It's pretty significant that in the year 2024, almost 2025, there's yet another transit protest from disabled people in the San Francisco Bay Area. The reason why that's significant is because that's kind of like the hub of the disability rights movement as we know it. In the 60s and 70s, there was a whole ton of protesting going on in the Bay Area, particularly from the disability community. But also there were things like independent living centers cropping up, cross-movement solidarity. And while the 504 sit-ins happened in the area, there were lesser-known protests, like the BART protests from disabled people. BART being Bay Area Rapid Transit System. Hale Zukas was a major player in those protests, demanding that transportation be accessible to all people. Disabled people are routinely denied from Uber and Lyft rides. It has happened to me quite often, particularly in metropolitan areas. I have literally seen my Uber pull up less than 3 feet in front of me and then drive off as soon as they see my crutches. And it's very obvious that they are doing that. This particular protest revolves around service dogs and service animals being able to get lifts and rides. Whatever you're feeling about people who have service animals it's really immaterial to the fact that Uber and Lyft are really the ones at fault. Because Uber and Lyft treats their drivers like independent contractors, it is up to those independent contractors whether to heed the law on accessibility, as well as to enforce their own accommodations around their own disabilities. None of these companies have created any sort of adequate solution to this problem, despite it being very discriminatory in practice. But this is why I use apps like Curb or use taxis more often, because they're legally not allowed to discriminate against me by driving off. They have a code of ethics that usually Uber and Lyft drivers aren't usually required to adhere to.
I don't agree with everything Trump says, but I gotta draw the line at abortion. Oh, word? Yeah, I just think it's morally wrong. I believe in the sanctity of life. I can respect that. Does it bother you at all that states with stricter abortion laws have higher infant and maternal mortality rates? Why would that bother me? I don't know. Just seems like the point of being pro-life would be to try to maybe prevent death, not cause more of it. Look, if you're consenting to do the deed, then you're consenting to everything that could come with it. The problem there, of course, being that not all sex is consensual. Also, there's the pretty glaring issue of complications like ectopic pregnancies and miscarriages. Sometimes an abortion is literally just a life-saving medical intervention. People are dying because doctors are afraid of going to jail or losing their medical licenses for providing life-saving healthcare. Is it a life-saving medical intervention when a doctor executes a baby after it's born because some lady just decides she doesn't want it anymore? Sorry, you're asking me if this thing you made up that doesn't actually happen and isn't legal anywhere is a life-saving medical intervention? Yeah. No, it's not, because it's not a real thing. In what world would someone carry a pregnancy for 9 months and then have a doctor execute it after birth? That simply is not happening. Well, Donald Trump said he heard someone talk about it on TV once. Right. Right.
Last Friday, my wife called me into her office and showed me 4 positive pregnancy tests. We've recently started trying to have another baby, so initially this was a welcome and exciting development. However, we had some serious questions. She had gone off birth control only 5 weeks prior, and while getting pregnant that fast is far from impossible, it was still surprising. More importantly, though, my wife had been on her period the week leading up to that Friday. but this happens. So he scheduled an appointment with her OB and figured we'd wait to see what was going on. Then that night, she started bleeding much more heavily enough to be concerned. So heavy that we soon concluded that it was highly likely that she was experiencing a chemical pregnancy, or a pregnancy that ends in miscarriage within the first 5 weeks. But because of the heavy bleeding, we got her in for a blood test as quickly as possible, the results of which necessitated an ultrasound, at which point we learned that a gestational sac had formed. However, the sac was unusually shaped, and the electrical activity in the sac was weaker than expected, which indicated that the miscarriage of a non-viable embryo was still in progress. But when my wife had a follow-up blood test at the end of the week, the results indicated that the pregnancy had continued, as had her physical side effects. There are several possible outcomes from this point, and the unknowns are causing a lot of stress in addition to her physical discomfort. But what we do know is that there is a high possibility that it will become necessary for this pregnancy to be proactively terminated. As unpleasant as our current situation is, one thing we're exceedingly grateful for is that we live in Washington State, where we don't need to be concerned about whether the health care my wife requires will be legal. If we lived a few hours to the east in Idaho, that wouldn't be the case, and our problem would be unequivocally worse and more dangerous, because the difference between the situation I'm describing being a problem and being potentially catastrophic is access to reproductive health care. Just over a year ago, an 18-year-old woman died in Texas after being denied health care at 3 hospitals despite having screened positive for sepsis, because doctors were afraid that treating her might result in the termination of her pregnancy, which could violate Texas's abortion ban. A year before that, a woman was traveling in Ohio when complications from a miscarriage caused her to begin bleeding uncontrollably. Despite the bleeding continuing in the emergency room, they discharged her out of fear of violating Ohio's abortion ban. She sat in a bathtub nearly passing out from loss of blood before returning to the emergency room and finally receiving treatment. The number of women who have died while pregnant has increased 56% in Texas alone since the state's abortion ban went into effect. Abortion bans are putting the lives of women in danger. It is undermining their liberty, subjecting them to unequal treatment under the law, and they're entirely, completely, 100% unnecessary. There is not a single state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby. However, there are now several states where it's illegal to provide life-saving care to pregnant women. Even if that's not the case in your state, electing the wrong people could put that at risk. Those who have followed my content for a while know how rare it is for me to provide such personal and private information in my work, but this is what is at stake in this election: the health, safety, liberty, and freedom of over half the population. And it's not just about who you vote for president or whether you live in a swing state. Elected members of Congress withheld from President Barack Obama his constitutionally provisioned Supreme Court nominee, which helped create the opportunity for Donald Trump to pack the court with judges opposed to a woman's right to choose. Members of state legislatures passed and state governors signed the state laws that are putting these lives at risk and violating human rights. If you genuinely care about protecting life and liberty in the United States of America, it isn't enough to just vote for Kamala Harris. You must vote for pro-choice candidates up and down the ballot. The stakes are too high not to. It's literally a matter of life or death.
Whether or not you are American, you've probably seen one of these ads.
You can vote any way you want, and no one will ever know.
Did you make the right choice?
Sure did, honey.
Now, of course, what I take from this is that a lot of women live in fear of their husbands, of what he will say, what he will do, not just if she exercises her right to make her own independent choice, but if she disobeys him, if she is not subject to his total control. But let's see how Fox News host Jesse Waters responded to the same commercial.
If I found out Emma was going into the voting booth and pulling the lever for Harris, that's the same thing as having an affair. That, to me, that violates the sanctity of our marriage.
Yes.
What else is she keeping from me?
Well, you know, Jesse Waters should know he is kind of an expert on these things. You know, having been dumped by his first wife after he admitted to cheating on her. But the hypocrisy isn't the only reason that this is a terrible metaphor for Jesse Waters. Because if he was in possession of half of a functioning brain and stopped to think about how this metaphor could be extended, at one point in this panel discussion, Janine Pirro actually asks a very intelligent question. She says, well, why would a woman do that? Is it maybe that she's afraid of her husband? Along similar lines, I would ask, if lying about who you're voting for is like cheating, then what is the metaphorical equivalent of coercing your partner to vote in a way they don't wanna, in a way that they don't consent to? It's not surprising that his mind didn't go there, though, because while Waters has this, personal experience with cheating, he does struggle with consent, having been credibly accused of stalking women. But also, the woman that he had the affair with, who he subsequently married, she was a staffer on his show, and so he held direct power over her career. He also began dating her by letting the air out of her tires so that she would have to ask him for a ride. It's like he went out of his way to create a scenario where she would have no choice but to say yes to him. And given that this is a man, these are the men voting for Trump, it is no surprise at all that the wives voting for Kamala don't feel like they can talk about it.
If you are a working class person who is voting for Donald Trump because he would be good for the economy, I desperately need you to understand that we are still reeling from the consequences of his economic policies to this day. Like, there was a law up until January 2019 that said that corporations had to wait a certain amount of time before they could offer cash for a house. Donald Trump got rid of that law because it was unnecessary regulation, and corporations bought up all the housing and caused a massive swell in housing prices. The primary driver of inflation at the moment is corporate greed and price gouging. They do that because Donald Trump gave them a gigantic tax cut in 2017. That means that now their profits are more profitable for them. And they use those profits to engage in stock buybacks, which means that none of it goes back to the working class. And because every year they need to be more valuable than the year before in order to make their stock more valuable, the stock that they are buying in mass, they are price gouging the consumers. Like, with the exception of Mark Cuban, almost every single billionaire right now is banking on Donald Trump winning. Because his economic policies take money from the working class and directly funnel them into their investment portfolios. I don't know if Harris is going to be good. I don't know if she's going to revitalize the middle class. But if you have paid attention to the last 8 years, you would know for a fact that Donald Trump will be bad.
If you're wondering why you keep seeing ads that are like, hey women, your vote is your own business, you don't have to tell, let me help you. 1 out of every 4 women in the United States will experience some form of intimate partner violence at some point in her lifetime. I'm talking stalking, physical violence, SA, etc. But people don't end up in those relationships overnight. Nobody starts off laying their hands on somebody. Which means that before that, there have to be weeks, months, even years worth of degradation, manipulation, psychological harm, the kind of stuff that breaks down somebody's spirit. Also known as the kind of stuff that makes it really easy to just tell someone who to vote for. Oh, you better vote for so-and-so or else you're going to be in trouble with me. And people don't want that. That is 25% of women in the United States that are susceptible to the type of manipulation and control that makes it easy to manipulate their vote. And that number is likely even higher, partially because DV cases are often underreported, but also because a lot of those psychological and emotionally abusive relationships are never reported. They never become physical, so people just don't report them. But they're still susceptible to that type of manipulation, control, and genuine fear when it comes to their vote. So yeah, it's actually really important that women hear that their vote is private and will stay private so they can get in the booth, vote for the person that they feel they need to vote for, go out there and tell their husband whatever they need to hear without their lives and well-being being in danger.